Hello, hopefully this is live. And my name is Ruth Peacey and I'm a wildlife filmmaker and polar guide. I'm going to be talking to you this morning all about penguins and Antarctica as part of the Earth Live Lesson series, which is an amazing series put together by Lizzie Daly. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about my favourite subject, which is penguins, and hopefully share with you guys some of the reasons why I love them so much. So right back to the beginning. Why do I love penguins? So my passion for penguins really started when I was at school and I had to do work experience. I knew I wanted to be a wildlife filmmaker right back then, but being at school, TV companies didn't take work experience people. So I was looking for other relevant companies and places to go. So I went for Bristol Zoo because I thought I'd get to spend time with animals. I didn't have pets at home and I really loved wildlife. So I got put into the bird section, and on day one, I met 12 Gentoo penguins and I completely and utterly fell in love with them. And I made it my mission after then to go and spend a whole season with them and hopefully make a film, which I was able to do quite some more than 10 years later. And I'm going to tell you all about that adventure now. It was a real privilege, and Antarctica is the most important place in the world to me, and hopefully you'll get to understand why. So I'm going to start off with how my journey began, using a globe. See if I can do this properly. I have practiced, I promise. So starting here in the UK, which is just here, for people who don't know, just there. That's where we're based, or where I'm based now, right up here. And then I flew all the way down to Argentina, flew to Buenos Aires, which is just around here. And then I took another short flight to a place called Ushuaia, which is right at the very tip of South America. There, if I hold it up, you can just about see, hopefully, the very tip of South America down here. And then I had to get on a really tiny boat and travel across this passage of water here. And that's called the Drake Passage, because I was headed to this really large continent here, which is Antarctica. So I set off, and it was all going really well. In fact, I didn't get seasick. That's probably because I was so excited about seeing penguins. I saw albatross, and it was all sunny and really lovely weather. We were on quite a small boat, so the area that I had to live in was much smaller than even my living room is now. I had a bunk bed that was pretty much the space of this bookshelf behind me. I could lie down and that was it. And then we got a really big storm, and the storm hit and loads of snow and ice fell onto the boat as waves crashed over. They would freeze onto the rigging, and it was quite scary, I'm not going to lie. When we got out of the storm, we were able to chip away at all that snow and ice, and the captain calculated it was about 6 tons of ice by the amount the boat lifted up out of the water. So that's how much it was being weighed down by the ice that had fallen onto it. So a little bit scary, but I didn't realise how dangerous it was. I'm not going to lie. I was quite naive, and that is often quite a good thing when it comes to adventure. I've decided you've got to be prepared, but having a little bit of naivety means you're not quite so scared. When we arrived, this was the view that hit us. Hopefully you can see that. So as you can see, the bay is starting to fill with ice, and the place that we're headed to is a tiny island called Port Lockroy, which is somewhere back here, somewhere around there. And this is a place that's known to have a colony of Gentoo penguins. And the reason I'm travelling down there is because I've finally been able to make a documentary called Penguin Post Office. So I travelled down with a wonderful man called Andrew Graham Brown, whose company made Penguin Post Office for the BBC. And we had Tudor Morgan, who's a polar guide and explorer, and Helen, who was the base leader for the post office with us, as well as the captain, Dave Roberts, and Bertie, who was our first mate. And we all headed down in this little boat, which was this big. So you can see it there, pelagic. And we headed down to try and get to this post office. And the reason we were going to this post office was because it is home to 3,000 Gentoo penguins. And yes, there is a post office in the Antarctic. So the post office used to be an old scientific base, and it used to be run by the British people. It was part of Operation Tabarin, which was established during the war as a kind of base area for the Brits. But they did a lot of science there. They did all the precursors to the ozone hole work was done there. They did a lot of ionospherics and atmospheric research. So it was very exciting to be able to go there. And subsequently, what they've done is they've turned this base into a museum. So people can go down on tourist boats, on cruise ships, and they can visit this base. And crucially, they can send a postcard home because they've turned it into a post office as well as a museum. Fantastic. So, and as I said before, the post office is surrounded by 3,000 Gentoo penguins. So I'll just show you what a Gentoo penguin is, just in case you're not quite sure. That's a Gentoo penguin. Whoa. And you can tell that it's a Gentoo penguin. If I hold it up here, I'll show you here. So you can see it's got this characteristic red bill. Otherwise, it's a black and white penguin entirely. And I think they're the coolest penguins. And that's because they've got this white patch over their head. And I like to think that looks like white sunglasses, making them super cool. They put their shades on their heads. So that's a Gentoo penguin. And as I say, we headed down there. When we first got there, it looked like this, the bay. So really, really icy. We can't really go in with the boat at that point because we wouldn't be able to get through all this big ice. So we hung out and we waited, and eventually the ice all compacted because it was really early in the season. It all compacted, and we were able to drive the boat into the ice. And this is what we did. So this is the boat here. And you can see it's parked in the ice. And in order to park a boat in the ice, you drive it in, and then you have to very carefully, and we sent Tudor because he had the most experience at that point. In fact, he still does, quite probably. We sent him into the ice, so very carefully he would climb over the front, holding onto a rope, so in case he fell through the ice. And he climbed over the front of the boat, and he walked all the way over to where there was a big iceberg, and he tied a rope around the iceberg and then climbed carefully all the way back onto the boat and got back on. So our boat's carefully tied in the ice. And we waited there for 3 days. And after 3 days, we were getting really, really itchy feet because we could see all the penguins walking past us, and we really wanted to get in and film them way ahead of the season starting down there. So we were the first boat down. So what we did eventually was we did climb over the boat ourselves, all very carefully once we were sure that the ice was much firmer. And we took sticks and we'd walk along and we'd prod the snow with our sticks very carefully and check that we weren't going to fall through as we walked through. And we walked with the penguins, and we were able to film them all coming ashore, which is fantastic because that was the start of our season down there. I'm just looking through my pictures here. And then we were able to catch pictures like this. Don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can see it. These are the Gentoos going through their courtship. So at the start of the season, they all come together and they'll meet up and they'll call from the sea. And I'm going to try and do a penguin call for you now, a Gentoo call. So I've never done this live on a video camera, but on a webcam before. So let's hope it works. I'm going to sit myself up a little bit. So first of all, they come to each other and they'll bow to each other and they'll go like this. They'll go and then they'll do what's known as an ecstatic call. So bear with me. They'll go like that. And they'll look to the sky and they'll both do this call. And actually in many languages, particularly Dutch and German and maybe some other European languages, the name Gentoo or Gentoo in those languages is actually donkey penguin or ezel penguin. And I believe that's because of the call, because it's kind of got that sort of braying sound to it. So we were able to get there super early and capture the mating and capture all of the penguins coming together and starting their breeding process, which was super, super, super exciting. We also got the post office opening, and this is one of the buildings around there. This was known as the boat shed. And you can see in front all of those penguins gathering together just there. And these penguins are all waiting for all their partners to come and to start building a nest. And that brown stuff, actually, if I hold it up again, this brown stuff that you see here, you get a lot of brown material like this in your back garden, and you think, oh, that's mud. And when you think about Antarctica, you think, oh yeah, that must be mud. Well, there's no mud in Antarctica. I'll just let that settle in for a minute. That brown stuff is what's known as guano, or penguin poo. And it's everywhere around penguin colonies. And it's very, very smelly. I call it eau de krill. That smells very much like fish, or if you've ever been to a zoo or walked past a zoo that's got penguins, it's like that smell, but much, much, much more intense. It's got a very fishy odour to it, and it penetrates everything. So it will get inside your clothes. You can smell it. You can, as you breathe, you can really smell it all the time. But after a couple of days, you don't notice it at all. And people who come and visit you, if you get visitors coming, they ask you about this smell, and you totally forget what the smell is. So it's only after you're very lucky and you have a shower that you put fresh clothes on again and you realise quite how bad you smell before. But that's good that the penguins don't mind the smell too much. I'm going to show you a picture. Sorry, I had all my pictures lined up here and I've knocked them over in my excitement, which is classic me, really. I'm just trying to find a picture to show you what might eat these things, and I can't find one. So I'm going to have to describe it to you. So there's a bird called a sheathbill, kind of like a white pigeon, that lives around penguin colonies, and that actually eats penguin poo, believe it or not. So they help to keep it tidy and help to keep it a bit cleaner than perhaps it might otherwise be, but there's still an awful lot of guano around. So these penguins are building nests. I'm looking to see if I've got a nest. And then they create these sort of pebbles like this here, these piles of pebbles or stones. And that's what they're nesting on, these conical shapes. And as you can see here, these chicks are now, these are a couple of weeks old now, these little Gentoo chicks, and they're being fed. I often get asked, why is the parent, this bird here, eating its offspring? And it's not at all. It's regurgitating food and feeding its chicks. So you can see there it's getting a really big mouthful of food. What they'll do is they'll beg, they'll give little calls to the parents, and they'll tap the side of their beak quite often as well, to try and get them to regurgitate food. And then they feed their offspring, as I've just shown you. This is once they're growing. And then when they get a little bit older, they start to really explore their surroundings. So these chicks are now, when they first hatch, they're probably the size, I don't know if you can see there, they're probably like the size of a tennis ball or slightly smaller, the size of a hamster. I always say they could fit easily, I've never held one, but it could fit easily in the palm of just one of my hands. As they get a bit bigger, they could fit in two hands, and they're probably about this big when they first start exploring. So they've grown from being about this big and staying primarily underneath their parents or very closely guarded and looked after them on the nest, to growing up to about this big when they start leaving the nest. They start exploring the world around them. That's when they start becoming super curious. And if you're filming them, they'll come over to you, they'll try and peck your gear, and they'll try and chase you. And it's super, super, super cute. But it can make life a little bit difficult if you're trying to film natural behaviour, because obviously you're in their environment and you're trying not to disturb them. And it also makes them quite vulnerable to these guys. So that's what's known as a skua. It's a bird of it's a it's a bird of prey, really. It's got webbed feet, but it's a bird that predates on penguin chicks, particularly when they're quite young, and even when they're like this big, it will still swallow them whole. Shocking, absolutely shocking. But they live around quite near to penguin colonies, and they've got individual. They have offspring one at a time that they have to feed that kind of coincides with the breeding season of the penguins. So you can kind of understand why they need to be feeding their chicks themselves. I'm just trying to go through. I've totally thrown my pictures out of order here, so it's quite entertaining. I can show you a whole selection of them. So all of this is happening round about the middle of winter or the middle of summer in the Antarctic. And this picture here looks quite light. That's the Antarctic. These rocks are behind Port Lockroy, which is where we were. And that picture was taken on Midsummer's Day at about 1 o'clock in the morning. So it's still quite light all day round. So one of the challenges that we have as filmmakers when we're filming penguins in these places is trying to persuade ourselves to leave them for a little bit of time and get some rest, because it can be really hard because there's things happening all the time. These penguins breed in the summer because during the winter their homes freeze over and they can't get as much food, so they've got to pack their breeding season into a very short few months over the summer period. So they work 24 hours round the clock, feeding their young, looking after their young, heading out to sea to go fishing. So it's super busy and it's super exciting. I'm just trying to think. So we basically filmed them. We just filmed Gentoos for Penguin Post Office, and we filmed them all the way from the very beginning of November, when, as I say, they were just coming ashore and starting to do their courtship, right the way through to when they were having chicks around December, January time, and then through as those chicks got bigger and grew up, all the way through to February and March, when they finally fledged and left the nest. And that's, of course, when they're open to predation by things like leopard seals in the sea. So we spent quite a bit of time having leopard seals, watching leopard seals predating penguins. I actually got chased by a leopard seal. I was in a small rubber boat. It's called a rib. It's got a motor on it, and we'd use it to get to shore each day because we were living on that yacht. And this is, of course, the ice is all melted by now, so we don't want to swim because it's really cold. Sea temperature is probably between 0 and 3 degrees, so it's very, very, very cold. So we'd get in these boats and we'd use the boats to try and find this inflatable rib, to try and find leopard seals predating on penguins. And once I found one, and I was super chuffed because this leopard seal had just taken a penguin. And I thought, great, I'll go and grab Andrew, we can film it. And as I turned around, this leopard seal came after me, dropped the penguin and started to chase me. And it was leaping all the way out of the water. 100% of its body was coming out of the water. So it was the same height as me, coming after me as I belted away in this boat. So that was probably one of my most scary wildlife experiences, I have to say. But of course, we occasionally saw other visitors as well. And this is an Adelie penguin. You can see there. Now, the difference here, hopefully you can just about see it doesn't have a red beak. That sort of reddish patch is actually from the way the photo's been taken and the light around it. It's got a black beak and it's completely black and white, these penguins, unlike the Gentoos. Again, just to remind you, that's what a Gentoo looks like. There we go, a really red bill and this head. But we did see, so we saw Adelies and we saw chin straps as well. As a polar guide, I've seen a lot more different species of penguins, and I've been on other adventures to the Antarctic where I've got to see plenty as well. And I'm really excited to say that later this year, hopefully in just a couple of months, I'll be releasing my new documentary, which is called Expedition Penguin. And I'm super, super, super excited to share that all with you when it comes out. In the meantime, if you want to look at penguins yourself and help with citizen science, you can log on to penguinwatch.org. That's www.penguinwatch.org, and you can count penguins. And that really helps us with our understanding of all the different species of penguins right around the Antarctic and subantarctic islands. And finally, if you want careers advice on how to become a wildlife filmmaker, a polar guide, or any other profession really, if you want to sign up to liketobe.org, then there's lots of people, professionals on board ready to share their careers advice with you. Anyway, that's the end of my live stream. Hopefully I've given you a little taste of Antarctica there and my first adventure with the penguins. Thanks very much and speak to you soon.